This is an ABC News special report.
Good evening. I'm Wade Johnson in New York at ABC News headquarters. We're coming on the air at this hour because we have breaking news. President Trump has just announced on social media that the U.S. has just completed 3 successful attacks on 3 nuclear sites in Iran. This is the post that he put out just a short time ago. We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. All planes are now outside of Iran airspace. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter. General Abrams is joining us now on the phone. General, obviously this news is just coming in. We knew this is something that the president was considering. He was meeting with his top national security officials tonight, but he did give that 2-week time period that he was going to consider all of this. What do you think changed?
Well, Whit, I think, first off, I think the president preserved all options. And by putting a 2-week timeline on, he probably intentionally gave the Iranians sort of a feel that they had time to sort of gather themselves and gather their defense, which really provided an opportunity for our Air Force crews, our air crews, to have the element of surprise. And so they were able to get in and get out, as reported by the president, safely, which we're all very thankful for. And we're going to have to wait a couple of days to see how much success they had.
All right, General, thank you so much. We'll try to check back with you in just a moment, but I do want to get to our Ian panel, who's been following all of this very closely. Ian, I believe you are still there on the ground in Israel. What can you tell us about what you're learning?
Yeah, this is a major event. I mean, we have been speaking to Israeli officials over the last few days, and they were certainly making it clear to us that this 2-week window that had been set up by President Trump was unrealistic. One official said to me, without agreeing to be quoted, they felt that it was going to be much quicker than that. Remember, they have hit a number of facilities across Iran. It's now 10 days since the first bombs were dropped by Israel on Iran. But the difficulty was this one particular facility at Fordow. It's buried deep inside a mountain, and it was felt that Israel, in fact no other nation, would have the necessary ordnance nor the aircraft capable of carrying out a mission that would be capable of destroying that. Now, we have to wait and see a bomb damage assessment, see how successful it's been. Nevertheless, we were reporting and we're hearing that U.S. stealth bombers have been moved closer to the area, to Diego Garcia, which is it's owned by Mauritius. It's got a British base there, and that has been a base in the Indian Ocean that would allow American bombers to be within much closer striking distance to Iran. And as the president has said, it looks like the U.S. bombers have taken place. So as we were reporting again, it was the likely the B-2 stealth bombers, which is the only bomber in the world that's capable of carrying these MOPs, these massive ordnance projectiles, these very heavy bombs. But what makes them specific is they're able to dig into the ground. In other words, they don't explode the second they touch the ground. They physically dig down into the land and then detonate. And because the depth of Fordow was so deep, it was felt that this was needed. Now, Israeli officials have been making clear to me that if President Trump decided not to act or delayed his decision, that they would act anyway. And we have to wait and hear from Israeli officials what their role in this is. It is possible, of course, that this would be a one-off strike. I think that's less likely. It could be part of a complex of military action, not necessarily all strikes, perhaps something on the ground. There've been intelligence gathering about this facility. I mean, Israeli officials have been telling us that they're very upbeat, that they feel they've been enormously successful so far. They've already set back Iran's nuclear energy production. Of course, the Israelis in particular, and certainly President Trump, were concerned that their production of highly enriched uranium had got to this point, to 60%. of production, that it could very easily then be transferred into weapons-grade uranium. And that was something that the International Atomic Energy Agency, an independent UN agency, had said was the situation, that Iran had basically doubled its production of this material, and Israel had seen that as an existential threat, that having dealt with the other so-called enemies in the neighborhood, dealt with Hamas, dealt with Hezbollah in Lebanon, in Syria, you've had a change of regime, that it was actually Iran was the one remaining piece of the puzzle. And in order to ensure the safety of the state of Israel, then they had to be sure that Iran was no longer capable of being within weeks of producing potentially weapons-grade uranium. Now, we know that the U.S. intelligence community, this has been a dispute between the president and his own director of national intelligence and the intelligence community, whether Iran had the intent to make a nuclear weapon. No one's seen any evidence to say that was the case. The issue is that they had the capability, and the judgment in an intelligence and political way was too much. So what we know from the president is that there has been this bombing run. The president described it as successful. It has hit a number of sites, including Fordow, this uranium facility, which was a hidden facility up until a few years ago. It was actually President Obama who announced to the world the existence of this. And there's always been concern that even though there were agreements with Iran in place for a while, they were torn up by President Trump, the JCPOA, this nuclear a treaty which basically meant that Iran was not supposed to enrich uranium up to a certain amount and certainly wasn't supposed to use it for nefarious purposes, that actually the reality on the ground was that Iran was not abiding, at least by the spirit, if not by the letter, of this agreement, and that had continued to raise concerns. Israel, for years, has been flagging what the situation is, but I think two things had happened, and I've heard this from Israeli officials. The two strikes that took place by Iran on Israeli soil and by Israel on Iranian soil last year were indicators to Israel that they were seeing things that were of grave concern to them, and that they felt that the window of opportunity was open, and that if they didn't act preemptively, then they could get to the point where it would be too late for them to respond. That's certainly what Israeli military and political officials will tell you here. So that is the situation. It is an important development. We've already seen some reaction from certainly the Iranian media, adverse reaction to America's role. Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, had already threatened retaliation against America if this took place. There is a lot of nervousness in the region. Here in Israel, for example, the American military has been evacuating American diplomats and their families who wish to get out the area. Everyone has been put on high alert. There are a lot of American troops stationed throughout the region, not least in Iran, where there are a lot of pro-Iranian militias, and also inside Syria. Syria obviously is more benign territory, but it doesn't mean that there aren't bad actors there, and that will be of concern as well. Diplomatic, military and civilian ties. And of course, the State Department have been advising any American citizen to get out of Iran. That will also prove extremely difficult at the moment. But certainly, I would say in terms of foreign policy, this is the most important, most significant moment of President Trump's second term. Whit?
Ian, panel for us, thank you very much. We're going to bring in our Louis Martinez, who's joining us now, covers the Pentagon. And Louis, you're on the phone, I believe, with us. And one thing I just wanted to ask you about, because we were getting these reports from flight tracker sites earlier that these B-2 bombers were on the move. We thought that they were moving, according to sources, toward Guam. What do we know about what may have changed in that plan? And was this part of some sort of diversion, or what was it that led to this move tonight?
But those are all great questions. We're trying to get to and get a real good handle on that. But you're exactly right. This is a very public tracking on flight tracker websites, on radio communications from air traffic controllers that indicated that these B-2s had left their base in Whiteman, Missouri, and were bound westward. We talked to officials who told us that, yes, the bombers were headed to Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, which is a place that they've deployed from previously, but that there were no further orders. So the question is, were these B-2s allowed to continue on towards Iran and striking some of these targets? Were they not used? What other kind of assets may have been used? One of the things that I think that has been lost here over the last week or so is that the United States has had a very strong military aerial presence in the region already. We knew that additional fighters and bombers had been surged into the area, but those aircraft are very capable of dropping bunker buster bombs themselves. With the focus has been on, as what Ian talked about, this massive ordnance penetrator that's that 30,000-pound bomb that only the B-2 can carry. But there are also lesser types of bunker busters, 2,000-pound bombs, 5,000-pound bombs, and those are capable of being carried by some of the more conventional aircraft in the U.S. Air Force's inventory. So the question is, were those lesser bunker busters used? Was the massive ordnance penetrator used? And what kind of aircraft were used? Now, as we move forward from this, another thing to look at is potential retaliation from Iran. That has been the main concern at the Pentagon all throughout the discussions as President Trump met with his national security team. Essentially, how do we ensure that if the United States does get involved, should we get involved, what kind of a retaliation could we face? And, of course, you've got 40,000 troops in the Middle East region. We're talking about Iraq, Syria, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. That's where American forces are. Some of those countries some of those bases are very close to Iran. And one of the things that we've seen over the past week is that, for example, at the Navy base in Bahrain, about a dozen small Navy craft left the harbor and were essentially still in territorial waters of Bahrain, essentially to protect them. We also saw that some of the 30 aircraft, most of them refueling aircraft at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, had also left, presumably to protect them. They'd gone to other bases in the region. So the defensive posture that the Pentagon has been talking about for the past week, we saw that in play. And the concern is what happens if Iran is struck by United States aircraft? What happens in terms of retaliation? Does it happen? How quickly can it happen? And then what happens next?
And Louis, big picture on that, just broadening it out a bit more. Obviously, the region has changed dramatically with the toppling of the Assad regime in Syria, the weakening of the Houthis and Hamas and beyond. Who could potentially come to Iran's defense as an ally for them?
In Iraq and Syria, you have these proxy groups that have been greatly degraded over the last year or so, but they still maintain that capability. We have about 2,500 troops inside of Iraq. We have 1,500 inside Syria. And these are not big bases, but they're kind of exposed. Yes, they have some defensive measures. But if these groups were given the green light, we've already seen that they're capable of launching drones and rocket attacks on these bases. But if they're given the green light and go full bore, it could overwhelm potentially some of the defensive systems that they have there. We know that the Houthis, they had been going full bore in their region, attacking commercial shipping. That's why the United States went on this extensive and sustained air campaign recently. And then we know that the Houthis have been launching missiles from Yemen towards Israel, some of which have been intercepted. And so, and a reminder, there are U.S. Navy ships still in the Red Sea. There are Navy ships in the southern Arabian Sea off the coast of Yemen. So potentially these proxy groups could be involved. But the United States, again, we have to see how Iran retaliates, if they choose to retaliate, and whether they choose to actually broaden this by actually attacking some of the locations of some of those bases where U.S. bases are located, some of the countries, and what kind of restraints are going to be placed on them.
Yes, major questions about what happens next, what the U.S. role will be. But regardless of the future actions, right now, the United States is standing side by side with Israel. We are now in this war. And I want to go back to Tel Aviv now. Ian, panel, we are getting some information here, Ian, that Israel was notified in advance of this attack, these three different attacks on nuclear sites there. And Ian, no doubt this is what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wanted.
Oh, undoubtedly, it's not just what Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Israeli cabinet, and honestly, a large number of the Israeli population wanted, but it's also what Netanyahu and others have been lobbying for some time, trying to make the case to the president. And I spoke to the Israeli president just a couple of days ago, and he was making this point, trying to make other leaders understand that this wasn't just about a threat to Israel. This was about a threat to the wider region, a threat to Europe and a threat to the United States, a nuclear-armed Iran, a country that pretty much since the Iranian Revolution in 1979 has sworn to eradicate the state of Israel, has used blood-curdling language to that effect, a country that has actively supported so-called proxy groups, in other words, bankrolling, arming military groups throughout the region to agitate against the United States and also Israel. Hezbollah, for example, in Lebanon, was accused of being one of the primary instigators in the Marines barracks bombing in Beirut back in the 1980s. There have been a number of instances where Iran has been seen as a malign actor against Israel and its Western allies. Part of what we've been witnessing since October 7, 2023 has been an attempt to try and degrade Iran and its sphere of influence. Iran had successfully established, we talk about it as a Shia crescent. Iranians are primarily part of the Shia branch of Islam rather than Sunni branch of Islam, which is dominant, of course, in the Gulf. And they had extended, certainly after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, influence throughout Iran and then into Syria under President Bashar al-Assad. They were very active in the civil war there against the rebels, who obviously recently triumphed, and then into Lebanon itself with Hezbollah operating there. They were able to transfer weapons, transfer knowledge, and this was certainly regarded as a threat for Israel, which is part of the reason why it bombed Lebanon in the first place. And we've seen this gradual dismantling of the so-called Shia crescent. It's been an historic time in the Middle East. Whatever one side anybody may sit upon, you can't deny that the face of the Middle East has been radically changed under the Netanyahu government and with the backing of President Biden and now President Trump. So no surprise, I think, that the Israelis were notified. The Israelis would have to work in concert with the US. It remains to be seen whether any Israeli aircraft or resources were used. We know that Israel had said just a couple of days ago that they controlled the skies over Iran. That would have been very important for the Americans and any operation. In President Trump's message on Truth Social, he says that they hit 3 sites, not just Fordow. And that would potentially imply that obviously that multiple aircraft were involved, and we have to wait and see if Israeli aircraft were also involved. If not, certainly Israel appears to have eyes on the ground, has a number of intelligence gathering sources. It's been going after people on the ground, individuals, nuclear scientists, key military commanders, and it has, like it did in Lebanon against Hezbollah, dismantled a lot of the leadership. But there are huge questions about what the reaction is and what happens next. Now, President Trump again says on Truth Social, he refers to let's make peace. Well, is Iran going to be ready to make peace? Now America has taken part in this bombing. What will the reaction be in the wider region, where we saw on Friday, after midday prayers, significant protests, tens, hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets in many countries throughout the region, angry at Israel's bombing, and a lot of that anger will now turn to the United States. As we've said, there will be huge concerns for the safety of US civilians, US military, US interests throughout this region, which are multifarious, in not just troops on the ground. You have the US Fifth Fleet fleet docked in the region, in the Gulf. You have military camps spread throughout the region, but of course you have multiple businesses, embassies, consulates. So there are huge numbers of things to be of concern about. There have been certainly worries about the U.S. consulate here in Tel Aviv and whether or not that would potentially be a site for retaliation. It's been very quiet relatively here in terms of Iranian attacks. And everyone had expected that to change, as it has most nights, pretty much around this time. We have to see what the impact on Iran is. I think those people who feel that Iran could be easily bombed into submission do not necessarily understand the country. As we saw in Iraq, even as we saw in Afghanistan, it is countries and the regimes that govern them are not naturally given to immediately acquiescing to foreign intervention, to foreign bombing. In many senses, it can act as a rallying call for the nation to get behind the leader, in this case, this theocracy that has run Iran since the 1980s. And so we have to wait and see what the reaction is. They had threatened in blood-curdling language, the Ayatollah and others, that there would be direct retaliation against American interests in the region. And we have to wait and see whether that was just rhetoric or whether that was a genuine threat that will be followed through on. We have to wait and see what the bomb damage assessment is. Is Israel going to be content to say, we've looked at the damage and we've degraded Iran's nuclear capability enough to be acceptable? And again, speaking to a senior military official just 2 days ago, he made it clear we never said we'd get rid of all of Iran's nuclear capability. We just said that we would degrade it so it was not an imminent threat.
Ian, panel, stand by for us. We're going to go to Rachel Scott now, who's on the phone joining us from Washington, our senior political correspondent. Rachel, we are getting word that President Trump is going to speak tonight at 10 o'clock, about an hour and a half from now. But again, this is something that President Trump promised going into the election, that he was not going to be the president of forever wars. He was going to end U.S. involvement in some of these wars overseas. Now here he is initiating this attack on Iran, a country of 90 million people, and big questions not only about what comes next, but divisions within his own party and support.
Absolutely, Wynn, and we are already hearing from a number of lawmakers tonight, including Senator Lindsey Graham, who is a Republican senator on Capitol Hill, who had direct conversations with the president multiple times over the last several days, in which he urged President Trump to participate, to join Israel and strike Iran's nuclear sites directly. And we have heard from Senator Graham tonight already. He said that this was the right call, that the regime deserves it, saying, well done, President Trump. But there are plenty of Republicans who have clearly stated that they did not believe that the president should be getting involved. And for that primary reason, this is what the president ran on, being a peacemaker, pulling the United States away from ongoing conflicts, not getting the United States even more involved in ongoing conflicts. The president was asked directly about some of those words from Republicans, and he said, look, the bottom line here is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. He believes very strongly in that. But undoubtedly, this is going to divide the party. And the question now is, do Republicans rally behind the president as he moved forward with this action, or do they speak out against it? We know a few did have a few warning signs leading up to it. We are learning tonight, as you said, the president is expected to address the nation at 10 p.m. tonight. And as Ian clearly noted, it cannot really be understated here, just the immense pressure that the president was under from the Israelis. I was told he was under immense pressure from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself. The president, we know, was in very close contact with him. They stayed very close over the last few days, I'm told, talking sometimes even multiple times a day. The president, a week ago, in a remarkable turn of events, said that this was possible, but that the U.S. at that point was not going to be involved. Then we saw him leave the G7 summit early to rush back to the White House, and that kicked off a series of meetings that the president was having with his national security team in the White House day after day, ultimately now leading up to this decision. We know the president was warming up to the idea, and tonight he announced it via Truth Social, and he will address the nation at 10 p.m. tonight Eastern.
Rachel Scott, thank you so much. Let's go to our chief Washington correspondent, John Karl. John, you've actually been in touch with President Trump, speaking with him over the past couple of weeks about a variety of different issues. This idea of the president warming up to the concept, the possibility of striking Iran directly, do you have any sense of how quickly that developed and where it came from?
When he told us that he was going to make this decision at the last second. I don't think that was quite what happened here, but this came together incredibly quickly. And this is, without question, the most consequential decision Donald Trump has ever made. And where this goes, will this be consistent with the promise that he made when he first got into politics, when he first became a presidential candidate, and he talked about ending forever wars? The question now is, did he just possibly take the first step towards ending what has effectively been a forever war, which is United States adversity with Iran, something that goes back to the hostage crisis and the seizing of our embassy in 1979. Iran has been a challenge for every American president since Jimmy Carter, in many ways overshadowing other initiatives, other efforts to get objectives in the Middle East. So did he effectively put an end to the Iranian threat, or was this the first salvo in yet another forever war in the Middle East? I reached out to a prominent Arab diplomat from a country that's allied with the United States with a simple question. I think this is the question that we should all be asking: what now? What next? And this diplomat said, honestly, no clue. The Iranians have a vote now. So what happens? We have 40,000 troops roughly in the Middle East. That's a force, and it's a force that can be used to protect American assets, to attack the Iranians, but it's also a target with. And the Iranians, their nuclear program may now effectively be gone, but the thousands of mid-range missiles it has, short-range missiles it has, can be used to target not just American troops and American assets in the region, but American allies. I don't know which way this is going to go, but I can tell you this: this has the feel of a decision that is far weightier than any Donald Trump has had to make in his time as a political figure, in his time as president.
Yeah, and nobody starts a forever war thinking it's going to be a forever war. You look back at Iraq and Afghanistan, the intention was things were going to be wrapped up much, much quicker than what ended up happening. And here you have a country, 90 million people. We have already started to see some demonstrations in the streets in recent days against the United States, against Israel, and what all of this could mean going forward. The Ayatollah Khamenei, we're told that he was hunkering down in some undisclosed location, but had already named 3 potential successors. So what happens to him? How does Israel move forward? How do they go and verify what happened at some of these sites that were attacked? Let's go ahead and bring in our Matt Gutman, our chief national correspondent. Matt, you've spent a lot of time throughout this region. I know that you have a lot of sources in Israel and beyond. What are you hearing? What's the reaction you're getting tonight?
I think I just want to jump on the point that John Carl made just now, Whit, and about how historical this moment is and how weighty it is for President Trump. Are we entering into a new forever war? We have to remember that Iran is the world champion of the forever war, waging a cloak and dagger war against the U.S. and Israel, the great Satan and the little Satan, for over 40 years now, right? They have had terrorist attacks behind the scenes. They have launched small-scale attacks. They have built armies around that Ian referred to earlier, that Shia Crescent, or the Ring of Fire, in Lebanon, Hezbollah, in Yemen, the Houthis, in Iraq, another group called Hezbollah. They have effectively surrounded Israel over the past 40 years and created this bulwark. And Israel has essentially dismantled it. But Iran is not going to let this go. And they are also keen observers of history, right? In 1981, Israel, in one fell swoop with 8 or 9 warplanes, managed to destroy Iraq's nuclear weapons program in Osirak. and there was no response. In 2007, Israel did the same thing in Syria, and there was effectively no response, destroying its nuclear capability. This is different. Iran is a nation of 90-plus million people, and they showed their incredible fortitude in the 1980 to 1988 war against Iraq. They lost 1 million people. And for the Imam then, the Khomeini, and Khamenei, who was his successor, making a ceasefire with Iraq and ending that war was called drinking from the poison chalice. And basically they're at that precipice again. Are they going to make a ceasefire, or will they continue fighting? At this point, I think it's understood, again, looking at recent history, when you give up your WMD, that is all you have. Gaddafi gave it up, and we saw how he was essentially butchered in the streets after he was captured. He was overthrown. So it seems, if history is an indicator, that the regime is going to try to hold on as long as possible. You mentioned Khamenei already has appointed 3 successors. I imagine they're going to go underground, and they're going to keep fighting in any way they can, lashing out at the United States and Israel with whatever capabilities they have left. And I think it would be very dangerous for anybody to underestimate the capabilities that Iran has at this moment. Even though they may be significantly degraded, they have been stockpiling them for many, many years. They are a very, very potent and capable adversary.
And Matt, thank you. And something else to watch here is the terror threat in the U.S. and around the world, and what this attack by the United States on Iran potentially does to that. Does it elevate here? I think that many would expect that it likely would. And we know that Iran has been a sponsor of terror all across not only the region but around the world, and we'll see how that plays out too. I do want to go back to the White House. I'm told our Selena Wang is there right now. Selena, you were there earlier as the president arrived for this meeting with his national security advisors. What more are you learning about the discussions and what played out in those meetings?
Well, Whit, you and I were actually on the air together as that meeting with his national security team was underway. And the president, for days now, he's been speaking to a wide array of his advisors and allies. In fact, right now, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is here still at the White House. And the president has been weighing a variety of different factions. On the one hand, you have a group of Republicans, more traditional conservatives like Senator Lindsey Graham, who had been urging the president to take forceful, swift military action. Then on the other hand, you really had frustrated members of his MAGA base who were urging the president to hold back, arguing that any U.S. military intervention or action would damage the president's reputation and his campaign promise to end all forever wars. In fact, we had learned from sources that an ally like Steve Bannon, the MAGA podcaster, had actually been playing an outsized role despite the fact that he has no official government position, and that he had this week spoken on the phone with the president. He had also met the president for lunch. He was someone who was urging for restraint. And when it comes to the timeline here, the president was clearly putting positions in place in case he were to strike. We know that Americans had been evacuated out of Israel. The U.S. military also pre-positioning to defend U.S. interests in case Iran were to retaliate. But just days ago, President Trump said that he was going to give himself 2 weeks to make this decision. The thinking was that he was going to buy some time, hoping that the Iranians would come back to the table to negotiate. The Europeans had been also pressing for diplomacy, but the president also said that he wanted to make his decision at the, quote, last second before it was due. And so what we are seeing tonight is a decision that came together very quickly. But Whit, as John Carl mentioned earlier, this is potentially the most consequential decision the president has made, and the big question is what happens next. We know from sources that the president wants this to be wrapped up nicely, that he wants this to be contained. But the question is, to what degree did we degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities, and is Iran going to retaliate? President Trump, in his Truth Social post tonight, he wrote that, quote, now is the time for peace. The question is if he was able to achieve the 2 goals that he wanted, which was number 1, to both end Iran's nuclear program, and number 2, to also have this be a peaceful resolution and end to the war.